All right. Hello, everyone. It's Simon Ammons again with you here from Technical Writer HQ. Today, I have Dave with me. He's a technical writer with a very interesting background that set him up on the path of technical writing. So let's just get right into it. Dave, can you tell us your name and where you work currently and what you do in your current role before we kind of dig into your background a little bit?
Hi, Simone. Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Yeah,
Thank you.
as you said, my name is Dave Costello. I am currently the senior technical writer at TetraScience, which provides a scientific data and AI cloud for life sciences companies. And I manage all of the technical documentation for that platform, which essentially means all of our end user documentation, user guides, API references, how-to tutorials, and grab bag of other random documentation needs that inevitably come up.
I love it. I love it. And so you said in Tetra Science, it's for life science doing that documentation. So do your customers clients tend to be more life science customer like PhD scientists, engineers, or DevOps developers from those life science companies? Like who do you normally have to target in your documentation?
Well, it changes on the use case because we do end up interfacing across a wide swath of our clients' organization.
Mm,
Everyone from system administrators on the IT side of like, how do I implement and set up the networking to use this platform, integrate our lab and manufacturing equipment, to the end user scientists who are trying to then analyze that data, push it to downstream machine learning and AI analytics systems, and actually, generate scientific outcomes with that data. And yeah, there's different documentation targeted at each use case.
Okay, I got it. I got it. So earlier, before we joined the call, he was giving me his fascinating journey from an English major into journalism, into copywriting, and now into technical writing. Can you take us a little bit on that journey, starting with your English? What made you do the English major, and then journalism, and then what made you jump into other forms of writing where you leverage your English background?
Yeah, absolutely. My career has been shamelessly opportunistic. I went to the University of Minnesota Duluth campus as an English major, basically because I really liked writing and reading, and people told me I was good at it.
There you go.
And it also afforded me, frankly, I saw my colleagues on engineering and harder degrees not having as much free time, and I enjoyed doing other things.
Hey,
My which hey, that's where my head was at when I was 17. Uh,
hey.
so that's how I wound up there, and I wound up being a climbing and kayaking guide while I was going to college. And I started writing in the outdoor industry for the local newspaper, and then also some climbing magazines and paddling magazines based on the work I was doing in the guiding field. And that was just, again, opportunistic from the sense of like, hey, I'm going out doing these trips anyway. It's like I can take photos and write about it. And that turned into a career where I wound up doing some documentary filmmaking, interlaced with some wildland firefighting, with some doing manual labor randomly. Moved across a bunch of states, lived in New Zealand, Colorado, New Mexico,
Nice.
traveled to 5 continents when doing that travel writing, wound up being an editor at Canoe and Kayak Magazine, Alaska Magazine. And yeah, anyway, just wound up doing a bunch of freelance travel writing work, which was a blast. But then I realized I met my now wife and we wanted to start a family.
Hey.
Um, and I realized that was not the trajectory I wanted to keep my career on.
Mm.
So I pivoted at that point to copywriting for a startup based in Seattle. And that was anyway, the main channel I was responsible for was based on personal finances. And did that for about a year and a half. That company got acquired, moved down to South Carolina. I did not want to move to South Carolina. So that required a job transition. And I got the opportunity this is my first chance at building my technical writing portfolio was at a business and consulting firm based here in Seattle. We worked across 40 different industry verticals, and I worked pretty closely with our cybersecurity and blockchain consulting teams. And that is what allowed me to build up a portfolio of technical documentation essentially for our consulting clients in both of those categories, which then led to an opportunity to join a blockchain startup based in Seattle, where I got to build my own content team and technical writing operation, which was a huge learning curve, but also a lot of fun, great opportunity. That then led into that company going out of business, me going back over to copywriting, working for a financial data company, managing their content marketing program for a couple of years. And then I switched. I really had enjoyed technical writing though, and wanted to move back to it. So then I moved over to Amazon Web Services, where I worked on their knowledge team and then prescriptive guidance team, where we created guidance for AWS's enterprise level clients with their cloud optimization and migration projects, which inevitably led me to where I'm at now, one of AWS's clients that has built their infrastructure on AWS serverless infrastructure.
And so that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Throwing shade at engineers, but okay, we'll survive. But what I find fascinating in all of those transitions though is how you were intentional about building that portfolio, looking at the next thing, and leveraging that your growing body of work as evidence of who you were as a technical writer. Can you talk about maybe an interview process you had, or maybe a job where you wanted to grow more into the technical side, where you had to lean on that body of work that you had started producing over the years?
Yes, absolutely. Interviewing for Amazon Web Services is a great case. I had no technical training other than the field experience I had just working with subject matter experts at the consulting firms I had been with. But what I did have was a body of work, a portfolio that I could show that it's like, hey, I can do this work, I can understand the material, and I can make it understandable to a wide audience, or a targeted audience, depending on, again, what the purpose of the specific content was. And that wound up being very effective. I got high, and AWS is also known for their behavioral interviewing. So that was part of it too, is like, do you demonstrate the general behaviors that they want somebody working there, to have? And along with that, I was just told like, hey, once we hire you, you need to get a certification. In that case, AWS certification. But I just did that within the first couple of months of being hired, and that was a great opportunity because I also got paid to get a certification at that point.
There you go, win-win, win-win. So on that note, like when you something you keep mentioning, use cases, target users, wide audience. I'm hearing this theme. So how do you incorporate who you're ultimately going to be talking to, or who you think is ultimately going to use your documentation into how you write the documentation in the first place? Like, what are you thinking about? Like, what are you not thinking about in generating that documentation?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is actually where I have found it's been very helpful for me in my career to not have a technical background, because it's easier for me to imagine someone walking into the proverbial room and having no idea what's going on.
That is
And
true.
it's super beneficial if you understand the mechanics of writing, know how to interview, ask the right questions, and put together a cohesive story. That's really, in the end, I believe fundamentally that is the act of writing. And then the different types of writing come across in like, who are you writing for and why? And I also rely heavily on working with our subject matter experts, product managers, other stakeholders. Like I rarely, I find myself asking like, am I the right person to decide this? Without getting other feedback, at least for larger campaigns, setting up a new channel, anything where like I need to really know this is who I'm talking to, the questions they have, and why. And then once you answer those questions, then you can go to a lot of the great content in like Tech Writer HQ to figure out some of the specific tools and strategies you can use to tailor it to that specific audience. Main differences would be like, okay, you are talking to a CTO, Chief Technology Officer, that's looking to migrate from like an on-premises data center to a cloud setup. Right. And there's certain considerations you need to do, general best practices, resources you're going to need to work within your team. And it's more, that's more of a guide and talking in more broad swaths, main ideas, things to consider. There's decisions to make, but the documentation isn't going to tell you what the right decision is for your business. Like you kind of need to decide that, but it'll point you in the right direction. Whereas then a how-to, and there's lots of different names. Like at AWS, we had a pattern, or like in the knowledge base, just anything that would be like a how-to article, like step 1 to do X, do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Right.
Go into the UI and select this button, and they'll do this. Enter this code, and at the end of it, you get a very specific tactical product. And you write those two things very differently.
I got you. The one thing that you mentioned here is you're interviewing your SMEs. You're having that communication and relationship with your SMEs. How important as a technical writer is it to, especially like you said, you're coming from a non-technical background, to establish that rapport, that trust, that communication across yourself, your team, and your SMEs, your more technical members on your team? How important is that for you as a technical writer?
It's super important. I can't produce anything without their input, sign off. We have a very symbiotic relationship in the sense that I rely on them entirely. And both of our work ends up being better. And I think that's the initial thing, and part of the challenging and entering any new environment, whether it's a contract role, a new full-time role. You have a new set of stakeholders that you have to earn trust with. And it's one of the things I focus on most, honestly. And part of that is just like general project management skills, communication skills, and also setting up expectations of like, what are our swim lanes? What are each of our strengths? What are our weaknesses? And owning up to the fact that you don't know everything, shouldn't know everything. And that's why I'm talking to you. And that it goes both ways. And it's like, at my end, setting up that expectation, like, I am here to help you produce content that is understandable and effective, and you are here to make sure that content is accurate, complete, and reflects our product or service based on your technical understanding. And then that really simplifies it for most SMEs, which they generally appreciate. And so long as you're responding promptly, asking succinct, clear questions, and I'd also say like, consolidate all your questions, like contact them once with your questions, and don't just have an endless round of like pinging them. I know that seems really simple, but that is a continual.
But say it again, because I think it's especially for people who just like walking into technical writing. I think people just think it's just computer screen and typing, and from what you're saying, it's a very different picture. So just say what you just said again, like send them one contact point, summarize all your questions one time. Like, why is that important?
Yes, you will get a response. That's kind of all it's all about. And it's part of what I love about technical writing. It's all about how effective is this? Does it work or does it not? In a lot of other writing types, the qualitative assessments get more ethereal and subjective, and it's like, well, it depends who you talk to. And in technical writing, I really appreciate the fact of like, well, does this communication style work? Does it produce a result? Can the customer answer their question, implement the system, and go on with their day without thinking more about the content they just read? And that's the ultimate goal, and part of what I really enjoy about it.
That's beautiful. Earlier too, you were also talking about how and use that word tactical deployment of the content, where your like your how-to guys is a step 1, go here, do this. Step 2, go here, do this. what, like, how do you, like, when you create that type of document, where it's very tactical, it's because you talked about like your CTO, like more of a high level SWOT, like global digitalization, like these are the things you need, the top three things you need to be worried about. But when you get into like the tactical, the person actually executing those features of those, how do you get to that documentation? How important it is to be very succinct. I think you mentioned talking about using external links a lot of times, so the formatting is very important. Can you like expand on that a little bit?
Yes, yeah, and there's actually a lot of really good. Um, Part of what I'm working on now is expanding my influence across a wide group of contributors. So right now I'm working with over 50 developers and product managers and trying to set up a scenario where things are changing so frequently, one individual contributor can't manage it all. So we need more people contributing. And part of that is setting up the systems and processes and templates to allow people to essentially paint by numbers. And I use a very similar process. And the different types of procedures that you'll document will vary from customer to come, depends on what you're writing about, right? But
Right.
once you're working with a specific product set or series of services, there becomes a pattern. Even if the patterns between different types of those services are different, like you can establish like, oh, this is how I document this type of workflow within this, even within different pages within a certain user interface. It's like, oh, this is how we introduce this concept. This is how we introduce navigating to a page. This is how we talk about subsections. This is how we cross-link between them. And taking the time to think about that before you're in the weeds writing the actual procedures and that overall information architecture of like, conceptually, we know these are the large like buckets of like, this is how insert end user, right? A scientist, this is
Right.
the question, the main questions they're looking to ask, their goal they're looking to achieve. And then how do you answer those questions as efficiently as possible? With as little clutter as possible. And to your point, like cross-linking is something I advocate for a lot, in the sense that many of your users don't need you to explain absolutely everything, but they do need to know what steps to take to get the job done, particularly in a how-to document. But often there's things where it's like, oh yeah, you need to enter, you need to have a basic understanding of pedantic, right? Like, well, you're not going to like write a summary of how pedantic works in the middle of your how-to document. But it's a great opportunity to link to pedantic's documentation in case anybody like wants to
What's
learn
the
more
real?
with their how-to tutorial. And somebody else who maybe already has a baseline understanding of that can move on and get the rest of the information they need quickly without getting buried in a brick of text.
The one word that stuck out when you were just sharing that, excuse me, allergies, information architecture. Because a lot of times I think of software architecture, cloud architecture, but you're going even deeper, like the way you actually collect and summarize and deploy the information itself needs to be in an architecture. So like, excuse me. So on that note, for somebody who is into an organization where it's like a startup and they don't have that information architecture, they don't, may or may not be, they think maybe, not to brag on anybody, but like you just gotta come in and start writing. How do you, as a new technical writer, seasoned technical writer, sort of educate the people that you're working with, the person that you're contracted to, that actually a lot of the work happens before you start doing the work? How do you balance those two things? Like how critical is that to actually get good documentation on the back end?
Yeah, absolutely. I think short answer is clear communication and expectation setting from the outset. And also like the goal of the project too. It's because sometimes the reality is like, hey, we just need this thing out and we need it as good as possible in a certain timeline. And oftentimes, particularly in the startup world, you need to build an architecture to support a new content type structure and like do this, like we need to figure out a way to do this more efficiently, more consistently, and like have it be easier moving forward, but you also need it done in like 2 days. And that happens all the time. And in that case, the good news is documentation, like software in my case, is, it's continuous improvement and change. You can change it. You can make it better. You can change the template. It seems like extra work, but that's where I try to get out. And this is something that's easier once you establish trust with your stakeholders, and getting out ahead of larger initiatives. So you can do that pre-work, make it understood you need that time prior to launch to set the organization up for success. And normally if you set out those needs, have established like a good, like, hey, you're a good producer, you're generally efficient, like we trust what you're saying. If you can, like, if you set up other deliverables, it's easier to come to the table and ask for those things, frankly. And that's the ideal scenario, is that you have the time to do that pre-work you mentioned. And then you have templates and a system set up moving forward for building on that content base, producing similar content, and then being able to roll it out to where maybe you can have other contributors, follow those guidelines more easily. And then you also have the work where it's like, oh no, we just need this one random thing and now or yesterday. And in that case, you do the best you can, and you typically apply the best, the best practices that you've hopefully already learned. And that's where, like, over time that becomes easier. You can see, hopefully you can see some of the pitfalls that will come up, like, okay, if we need to expand on this, is this a one-off? Or is this something like, oh no, we gotta like make some considerations of like, how is this going to build into, like, are we going to need a nested page structure? Anyway, there's a lot of considerations that can go into it, but you basically do the best you can on the timeline you have, and then communicate the concessions you're making to stakeholders, and being really clear on what you're going to get and what you're not, based on the timeline you have. And I've found people are very receptive to that, because the good news is there's always more work to do. And I spend a lot of time aligning the stakeholders I work with on priority and triaging backlogs and getting an alignment on what really is like highest impact for the organization, what is most important, what should we be as a communications team be spending our time on. And then, there's a lot of considerations that go in on that. And I obviously don't have the final say. I'm looking for feedback on that, because oftentimes what's a high priority for me isn't necessarily for our, customer success organization or product team, or, anyone else who has more insight into what our customers are actually looking for, the business initiatives we have. So I guess that would be my other piece of advice there, is listen to your stakeholders. They have good advice, and be willing to adapt your priorities and strategies based on what they need.
I love that. Oh, this is my new word for 2024, information architecture, concessions. I like that word too. Because there's so much you can do in 2 days. And there's also a lot you can do with, I don't want to say 2 months, but some weeks, some days of pre-planning, front-end loading before you actually get to the documentation itself. So we're just kind of getting towards the end here. So we've heard your journey from an English major to flying around the world and doing that body of work, and then going into copywriting and transitioning your writing, your just basic fundamental writing, into the world of copywriting, and then using that body of work to leverage into technical writing, where you have more guardrails, so to speak, if I would use that word. Any overall best practices, insights, likes, dislikes, if either types of writing that you've done over the years, especially technical writing?
First thing that comes to mind is don't reinvent the wheel on style guides. Like, there's a lot of good ones out there, and they're all pretty similar. And the important thing is to just pick one and stick with it. And I have seen a lot of organizations spend a lot of time on internal style guides that reproduce a lot of existing work. I know I'm a big fan of the Google developer style guide. Microsoft has a good one. Anyway, like, pick one and stick with it. And that also gives you legs to stand on pushing back on style decisions, because it's not just what you feel, right? Because that can be argued against, but it's like, hey, if them's the rules, them's the rules. And this is, and it gives you a play. It takes the decision making out of it. It's just like, this is the style we're following. And it allows you to focus your time and mental energy on more important editorial decisions other than like, does this require a hyphen? Can we use an ampersand in this or not? Like, just have those questions pre-baked and the answers to those questions pre-baked.
Okay, so my last question.
When they push back on it.
So we need a hyphen. I'm about to pass out. So last question. So I saw this article that TetraScience is fully adopting the AI and moving into that direction, so that making it more accessible and faster and more efficient for your scientists and the people actually using the platform. Have you seen AI? So that's the platform itself. Have you seen AI affect your writing itself, the content that you generate, how fast people expect you to work now? Have you seen any of that at all? Thoughts, high-level thoughts on AI on that side?
Yeah, let me filter in what I can share so far, because there's a non-disclosure agreement.
That's fine. But just
in a general sense, though, working in a greenfield industry where there isn't existing information out there for these large language models to pull from, with the tools I have tested, they haven't been very useful yet. And actually, yeah, I probably can't share any more than that, but we are experimenting with it, seeing ways we can make it more efficient based on, the tools and information we have. But to date, it has not significantly changed my role. I have seen it change roles of my peers, particularly in the copywriting fields. Yeah, but as far as talking about like new products and features that do not exist and are not documented on the public internet otherwise, fortunately, I appear to still be in a place where I am very much needed.
Okay, that's good to know. Good to know. So technical writing for the win. Technical writing for the win.
Yep.
So with that, we just want to thank you, Dave, for this amazing journey that you took us on from English, like I said, to copywriting, to technical writing, and information architecture. Like I said, is my new buzzword for the year. I love it. I love it. So any last words before we wrap up? Any last tips for interviewing? Last tips to let you stay this long in the industry before we close out?
Have fun. Don't have too much ego, but also know what you know and recognize that you bring value to whatever team you're on. This is a super helpful act we're doing by writing technical documentation. It's part of what makes the world go around, and I find a lot of gratification in that. It's a very fulfilling thing to do, knowing that I spend my day helping people answer their questions. So I hope you do too.
I love that. And with that, we will wrap up for today's webinar. Thank you so much, Dave, for spending some time with us. I really, really appreciate all that you've shared, every single thing that you've shared. So if you've loved hearing Dave, put it in the chat. Tell us what you loved about what he's shared today. And with that, we will wrap up for today. Join us next week for some more webinars where we talk to technical writers at the top of their game. And with that, we bid you a farewell, a good afternoon or good morning. What is it, still morning over there?
Yeah, we crested over.
We just crested over. Okay. Well, have a good afternoon, everyone. I will talk to you all next week. Have a good day.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Bye.